So I see people signing on through Skype, so I think we'll get started. So welcome to September Pharmacy Grand Rounds. Welcome back everybody from the summer. My name is Heather Naylor and I'm the Regional Pharmacy Research and Education Coordinator for Horizon. So I'm very pleased to welcome today Dr. Swan, who works up in Fredericton. She's a general practitioner in oncology. And some colleagues had seen her give this presentation before at Grand Rounds up there and had great things to say. So I'm very pleased that she's accepted our invitation to speak to you guys today. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Dr. Swan.
Thank you very much. I understand that you guys can't see me, but you can see my slides, and I think that's absolutely wonderful. Because my dog had me up last night with a thunder and lightning storm. So trust me, you are getting the better end of the presentation today. I'm sure a good presenter would start with something a bit better than a cliche, but here it is. I'm going to try to advance my slide. Let's see. There we go. Shit happens. So you see, I'm not really a good presenter. I'm only a storyteller. And I'd like to emphasize that shit happens, and there's times in life when people feel absolutely bombarded by crap. With limitations on time, increasing work demands, changing governments, loss of colleagues, financial constraints, etc., over the past while, I've noticed that more and more people seem to be talking about a lot of crap at their work. We hear about it from coworkers, we hear about it from family and friends, and as a physician, I even hear about it from patients. Many employees report workplace stress as the primary cause of their mental health problems, and those are usually depression and anxiety. I sometimes wonder whether it causes it or whether it's maybe a promoting factor. Perhaps it's a question of whether the chicken came before the egg. Regardless, this emotional turmoil subsequently impacts workplace productivity and our quality of life. So bear with me while I lean a bit towards narcissism and make everything about me for a moment. But if you search how to make presentations that don't suck, quote unquote, it will say that you can tell personal stories. Well, I'm told that I have picked a career that tends to have one of the highest suicide rates around. I read in the news about the alarmingly high rates of doctors killing themselves and the concerns about stigmas associated with asking for help. Well, rates are apparently higher for women, and also pharmacists and dentists have higher rates of suicide than non-healthcare professionals. Perhaps to add to the misery, I work with patients in oncology, and I'm told that the practice of oncology presents several unique work-related issues that challenge the mental health of its clinicians, can contribute to burnout, depression, and suicide. Granted, it does seem like a lot of my time is spent thinking about suffering and death. So in attempts to remain well-rounded, I decided to have a nice distraction. I farm. So I truly live a double life, heels through the day, rubber boots at night. Farming seems like an honorable way to spend spare time. Connect with nature, continue to try to provide care for creatures, you get to problem solve, be creative, contribute to society's well-being. But unfortunately, I've discovered two more things. Number one, farming also involves thinking a lot about suffering and death. And number two, it apparently also has an extremely high suicide rate. Mental health issues have been coming to the forefront in the farming industry as more people are starting to speak out. But once again, farmers seem to be another select population that fear stigma associated with emotional turmoil. Public awareness regarding all these issues is important, but in the same breath, I will acknowledge that sometimes it feels like we are inundated with catchphrases and marketing regarding mental health. Television ads and social apps remind us about the importance of it, and yet it's not as common to see specific tips or techniques provided to aid us all in developing coping strategies. Now, some people may be born with tremendous resilience. However, others may not. It's just like athleticism. Some people may have a natural gift for it, but others may require a coach and lots of practice. That doesn't mean they can't be an athletic superstar. They may just have to practice a bit more. Well, I suspect that some people are superstars at dealing with certain stressful issues at work, however, not likely superstars in every single situation. After all, just because you're a brilliant athlete at football doesn't mean you're going to be brilliant at high diving. So some people may require tips and coaching about how to deal with specific scenarios at work. Many of us spend a lot of our life at our workplace, so in theory, we should feel well when we're there. Well, let's see if we can advance. Wrong side. Here we go. There we go. So, in one ear, we hear that we should prioritize our own mental health, and yet in the other ear, we hear that we may not be able to access additional resources to help us at work. It may be hard to get coverage to take vacation time. There may be times when employees are taking on additional workload to account for lack of manpower. And when we try to get away from it all, we may hear about trauma and destruction on news broadcasts on the way to and from our jobs. We may read about the implications of impulsive and reckless behavior in the newspaper. We may witness ignorance and intolerance on social media. Sometimes it may seem like you just can't relax. You can't avoid the crap. It seems to be everywhere. So, do you really need one more person here reminding you today that work can be crappy? Well, I decided to start thinking about compiling this when I noticed that the oncology staff in the clinic where I work were all brewing with a bit of tension regarding ongoing adjustments. You see, last year we had just received an announcement that our oncology clinic was going to be moved off-site in order to proceed with hospital construction. With increasing work demands, medically and emotionally challenging patients, high staff turnover, the possibility of further changes to the work environment now, it seemed like crap was building at a rate we couldn't contain. And I wondered, how could we deal with it all? Could I come up with some sort of a solution? So many factors were out of my control, and admittedly, even if everything was in my control, would I even know how to handle that situation? Because I mean, after all, hospital construction needed to proceed. So I was told with presentations I should start with disclosures, and I'll be frank. I have no real expertise about anything. I have heard that human nature often tends to perceive changes as threatening. But even though I'm a physician, I'm not going to pretend to know a lot about why humans act or react the way we do. I'm not going to pretend to be proficient at human psychology. I'm not going to pretend to know everything about stress. I'm not going to pretend to have stellar expertise in running organizations or corporations. But suddenly, I realized that since I own a farm, at least I understand crap. I have had the personal advantage of working with lots and lots and lots of crap. So since I have some experience with crap, I wondered if I could at least try to help figure out how to deal with it at work. And as I thought a bit about that, I realized that I have experience in dealing with different types of crap. Pig crap, cow patties, horse shit, sheep balls, dog poop, chicken slime, the list goes on and on. All right. I'm going to dive into some shit philosophy here. When you think about it, different types of crap may need different processes to deal with it. For example, chicken manure contains higher levels of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium than cattle, sheep, or horse manure. Some state that it's better for gardens, whereas horse manure often contains a lot of weed seeds and it takes longer to age and compost. Maybe what we initially perceive as crap is occasionally valuable. The value may not be realized right away. In truth, sometimes the crap needs to be left alone and aged for a while before you may think of a way to repurpose it in a meaningful fashion. So maybe we should not try to eliminate all of the crap around us. Maybe it's fine that we're inundated with crap everywhere. We just need to learn how to process it properly. Well, the first thing I realized is that on a farm, exposure to crap happens at a young age. This is good. Children don't seem to have any preconceived notions about what is crap and what isn't. They just eventually learn that they shouldn't play in it. In other words, there's really no need to wallow in crap or be overly dramatic about it. You should probably acknowledge that it's there and then move on. I've noticed that some of us occasionally have tendencies to keep mucking about in it, even if we aren't actually going anywhere or achieving anything. We may need to occasionally remind ourselves to grow up in such circumstances. On farms, children are eventually taught how to deal with the different types of crap they may encounter. They learn that some crap should be treated carefully. Determining what crap, however, is the best takes a bit of finesse and experience. As we've already identified, different types of poo may have different purposes, but it isn't just the type that matters. Other factors are important too. If you put manure on the garden when it's too hot, it's going to destroy your plants. You need to learn patience, and you need to learn when to intervene and when you shouldn't. That takes a bit of guidance and experience. You may learn that from educating yourself by reading, or you may learn from watching others' mistakes. But the key is that that education occurs. Children also learn that some crap should simply be thrown out. It doesn't seem to serve any current purpose. That's why farms have manure piles behind the barns. You don't want that type of manure to build up inside. It will make a mess in your barn, and ultimately you won't be as functional and your farm won't be healthy and productive. As the pile behind the barn grows, it may start to appear daunting, may even cast a shadow on the farm. It may attract rodents and other creatures that seem to enjoy crap and will constantly remind you about it. Children learn that if they create healthy surrounding environments, rodents tend to stay away. You may still need that manure pile, but you can shape it and contain it. Eventually, children see something quite amazing that occurs intermittently on farms. Farmers can actually get excited about that height of the steaming pile behind the barn. They jump into their machines, decimate that crap, and spread it on the fields in small, manageable amounts. Sometimes breaking things down into smaller components makes it quite easy to deal with. These small little crumbs encourage growth, and they are blessed with a wonderful hay crop or pasture grass next year. Think of how many times a problem seemed unsurmountable until it was broken down into components. As they grow, children on farms are taught how to deal with crap through the different stages of their lives. When they get bigger, sometimes they're forced to clean more stalls, and they're forced to deal with larger and larger amounts of crap. But I've noticed on farms that as children grow, they're also increasingly capable of maneuvering larger and larger wheelbarrows. And then one day, you see them driving tractors. And ultimately, if you provide them with the right tools, they can still manage that extra crap. So those previous slides were pictures of my son, who was born very premature, and he's had his fair share of crap to push. Well, let's assume that here we are now as adults at work. Perhaps we've missed opportunities to manage shit as a youngster. We may lack some education about it. Perhaps we know a bit about it, but we're struggling to find the correct tools currently to help. What should we do? Well, we could watch others, try to learn tricks we could apply. Or maybe we could try to research and educate ourselves. But what about those of us that say we simply don't have time or energy to embark upon all of that? We're exhausted. We feel like we're overwhelmed. The hypothetical shit philosophy I've just spouted is cute, but it doesn't necessarily give specific tips. The work crises or imposing stresses may be imminent, and we simply may not have time. What should happen then? Well, maybe we should act like cows. Why do I say that? You see, during the midst of the proposed changes in our oncology clinic, I awoke one night and I remembered something I had witnessed on my farm years ago. Admittedly, it was a very bizarre thing to be thinking about as I lay awake in my bedroom, but I suspect that if we truly analyze many sleep-deprived thoughts in the middle of the night, they fall outside the spectrum of normal. So before I jump into the story of what I witnessed, I hinted that maybe we need to behave like cows. For some of us, that will be easier than for others. A few of us are actually quite capable of sauntering around, laying in the sun, eating all day. After all, we all have niches and skill sets. That being said, I suspect some people at work would have great difficulty acting like cows because they are actually asses. Keep listening. I mean this as a compliment. This is my ass. These asses of our workplace are our donkeys, and they sense when something is afoot long before the rest of the employees have heard about it. They may hear snippets of gossip. They may notice the weather before anyone else. They may hear news reports or social media events first. Simply put, they are always in the know. Think about it. You know someone you work with who's probably just like this. They're the ones that tell you about road closures before you've even left work. And just as I've witnessed on my farm, the donkeys alert to something. Their ears move forward and they face the direction in which the event is occurring. They may bray, and generally they always get the other animal's attention. This can actually be integral in helping maintain proper flow and function of the farm. The donkeys that bray at danger can be very helpful. The donkeys that bray at everything are just a pain in the ass. And as I've also witnessed on my farm, once the donkeys alert to something new, one cow may notice and spread the alert notification and may moo to another cow. And in turn, this cow may moo and grab some other's attention. The message is spread until all the cows understand that something new has developed. Sometimes a threat is quite easy to deal with. A few heifers may line up in a row and watch as a jogger passes on the road. Quite often the bull will raise his burly head and stomp off to the fence line to watch a stopped car. In fact, the cows have become so efficient at dealing with certain common threats that they rely on these niche positions that certain herd members complete, and the others maintain efficiency, and they often just keep grazing. Other times, the cows have figured out that they may need some help from upper management, the farmer. This can occasionally be challenging, but they have figured out that if they moo more, this will sometimes get the farmer's attention. I suspect they've also learned on my farm that if they cooperate and moo in unison, this is particularly annoying and it will often bring the farmer. I have seen this tactic used occasionally if a cow is in labor or if a calf is stuck on the wrong side of the fence. I've also noticed that this cooperative strategy, multiple employees saying the same thing, tends to gain more attention at work as well. Now I'm going to tell a story about something I witnessed on my farm early one summer morning when the cows were faced with an immediate, intense threat. It started when the donkey alerted. In fact, I first noticed the story unfolding because as I gazed out my kitchen window, I wondered why all the animals had stopped eating and they were facing the same direction. When I followed their gaze, I saw the coyote. He was boldly sauntering right through the cow pasture. Well, what do you think the cows did next? They started to walk around until they had rounded up all the calves into a circle, and then they positioned themselves around that circle of calves. The adult cows were all oriented such that their hind quarters were facing inside the circle and their heads were facing out. Why do you think they did that? Now, I can't hear your responses, but I suspect some of you might be saying for protection. The first thing that came to my mind was that they were protecting the calves. This was the vulnerable population. In healthcare, we always need to be conscious of this vulnerable patient population. By circling around the calves, nothing could get in, and therefore another benefit, I suppose, was nothing could get out. Usually, most healthcare providers do not need to be reminded to be attentive to the needs of patients. After all, many healthcare corporations are surviving based on the moral integrity of its providers to often fill many gaps. However, when a new threat to routine is imposed, it may be easier to forget about the vulnerable in the midst of chaos. With this circle formation, it's also interesting to note that when a new immediate threat was determined, the first thing that the cows did was to look after themselves. In a sense, they rallied their strength. I'm left to wonder, as humans, do we always do this? Well, some individuals are intensely invested in self-betterment. They avoid gluten, eat large amounts of turmeric and moon dust, practice floating yoga, take part in cycle karaoke, constantly wear their waist trimmers. They're experts at mindfulness, invest heavily in their looks, and try to constantly achieve for perfection. They spend tremendous amounts of time invested in always improving themselves. That's important. But I would also like to point out that the cows were not interested in just their individual greatness now, but rather the strength of their group. It may be easy to become so preoccupied with individual strength that we forget that an individual cow would never be able to form a protective circle on their own. In the era of texting with eyes averted in the hallways, we should remember that the cows knew that they still needed to network and surround themselves with other cows. This circle plan seemed reasonable, but as I thought longer about this, I couldn't help but wonder. Why didn't the cows just make a line and put the calves behind them? After all, they knew exactly where the coyote was. All they really needed to do was to make a straight wall of cows between the coyote and the calves. And actually, placing cows on the back side of that circle should have given them a distinct disadvantage, because those cows could not watch the coyote, which was already determined to be on the other side. Does that make any sense to you? Now, some of you may have recognized that assuming the circle position allowed for 360 degrees of surveillance. And although the cows on the back side of the circle could not see the coyote, what could they see? Now, some of you are going to say they could watch for other threats. Do coyotes always travel alone? No. Do problems happen in a singular fashion? There's a reason that we use the expression when it rains, it pours. So maybe those cows are smarter than we think. And just because the cows were focusing on dealing with one issue did not mean that they should neglect the potential for other issues to arise. Using members effectively in an optimal shape allowed them the opportunity to still have warning and prioritize if needed. Once the cows had established their circle, suddenly a mid-size black Angus heifer, which is a girl cow, she came abruptly out of the circle and faced the coyote. Now things were certainly starting to get interesting. I don't know if you are familiar with black Angus cattle, but I have noticed that they seem to have a bit of a pissy look on their face. And pardon my French, but it is a sort of a don't fuck with me look. I assumed that this gal just didn't have the patience for the coyote nonsense any longer. And I remembered this black Angus heifer as the one that the other cows seemed to pick on. For example, I had noticed in the past that she was often left out of the barn in the dripping rain with the calves while the other cows ate inside first. So we used to joke and nickname her the appointed babysitter. Well, her abrupt break from the circle grabbed the coyote's attention. He looked at her and he paused for a second. And in that single second, I witnessed a lot of new activity. Promptly, two more heifers emerged from the circle, and they positioned themselves slightly farther behind the first cow. I smirked to myself. Looks like they're all starting to get impatient, I thought. And just as soon as those backup heifers emerged, the leading black Angus suddenly snorted and leapt high into the air. She crashed down on her front legs and kicked her back legs up, bucking and thrashing, twisting in the air. It really was quite a sight. Well, the coyote didn't take more than that mere second to decide to run, and the Angus started to charge after him. She didn't chase very far or very long because, of course, the coyote was far from her reach by now and headed back into the woods and out of the pasture. I walked away from the window and I never thought much more about that event at the time, until the middle of that night as I awoke and I thought more about the chaos in the oncology clinic. In the darkness, I started to wonder if I had been far too preoccupied with initially noticing that dramatic heifer outside the cow circle, and perhaps I had made just a few too many assumptions. For example, I assumed that the black Angus heifer had emerged from the circle because she was cranky and aggressive. When she did that, shouldn't it have compromised the integrity of the circle? And yet, I never saw a single calf escape, and I never noticed any gape in that circle. Why? What do you think happened? Well, of course, the other cows simply shuffled positions. And when those two other backup heifers emerged from the circle, what happened? Yes, the cow circle simply shuffled again to close the gaps. And whenever they shuffled, yet another benefit of that circle shape was that it could spin. Of course, the cows could shuffle and spin their circle however they chose to with relatively minimal steps. And ultimately, another important point to acknowledge is that the cows proved that even with a limited number of bodies, they could still protect their vulnerable population. In essence, a smaller circle could still provide protection and even provide an offense as long as it knew how to shuffle and spin. The smaller the circle, the quicker it could, but also needed to spin. A smaller circle would have to make decisions quicker and therefore potentially even understand its members' skills better. The cows didn't just need to form a circle. They needed to understand one another. It doesn't mean they had to be besties with every single cow. It means they had to be able to objectively assess each cow and identify each cow's unique skill sets. In a game of Survivor, what would each cow be the most useful for? Spin and eject appropriately. So if the cows could shuffle and spin their circle however they wished, even if we assume that the Black Angus had emerged due to a biological impulse. Why didn't the bull's instinct take over? Why didn't the bull emerge from the circle? Why didn't he protect them, or at least try to protect her? I had seen him stomp at many threats in the past, so what was different this time? In theory, those cows could have sent out any cow that they wanted to. This is only my hypothesis about the answer to that question, and you may say that cows aren't that smart. Well, most times as a heifer stands in front of me with bangs hanging as if badly permed, one eye wandering far to the left, another eye wandering far to the right, I would agree. However, I have learned that perhaps cows aren't always that smart, but Mother Nature often is, and I strongly suspect that biological instincts prevailed in this scenario. What if the Black Angus heifer stepping out from the circle had not been random or impulsive after all? Since the cow circle could eject any member, what if her exit had actually been purposeful? Let's think about the threat, the coyote. What skill set does the coyote have that the cows don't have? I think speed. I suspect a single coyote could outrun most of our fat beef cattle. Now, what skill set would a bull have? The first word that came to my mind was power. Let's think about it. How would a coyote try to kill a cow? Well, I had watched enough nature documentaries that I figure a coyote would likely try to grab a cow's leg and take it down so it could latch into its neck. It's perhaps a bit graphic, but I don't think it's far-fetched. So what would be the cow's only good defense against a coyote? Ah, yes, a well-placed kick if the coyote got close, but that would involve accuracy, timing, and flexibility. Let's think about what that Black Angus heifer did in the second that the coyote paused. When the coyote paused, the coyote was likely about to think or make a decision. It's very helpful to recognize or be forewarned of this decisive stage at work. In truth, the heifer's antics only had a meaningful impact at the proper moment. She would have wasted time and energy if she had performed those antics even 10 minutes earlier, because the coyote wasn't even paying attention then. She quickly showed the coyote her skills when it mattered. She kicked, and she kicked high and hard. In a sense, she was making one decision less desirable for him because he was noticing the amount of work it would take to overcome her kicking skills. She was biasing him and implying that he should cut his losses and run. I naively assumed that this cow was previously made babysitter by the herd due to a low pecking order. But what if she had been made babysitter in the past because she was capable? What if she indeed was the best kicker? What would have happened if the coyote had made the other decision and had decided to go ahead and attack that Black Angus heifer? He may have been eventually successful, but it would have taken him some time and effort. And of course, we must not forget the backup heifers that had emerged. Refer again to the diagram. Do you think that their placement was random? If the coyote had to attack them as well, where were they placed? He would have had to run back and forth, and every time he had to take down a cow, he may have sustained a few blows, and his heart would have been racing, and his tongue might have started to hang out. Can you see what would have happened? Well, the coyote would have been tiring, and I strongly suspect that the cow circle could have ejected something that may have had the opportunity to overpower the weakened coyote at that point in time. The bull, because that was the point when power and strength may have been more important. Power may not always be the first way to approach a threat at work. There may be times you don't release a bull in a china shop. Power is only powerful if used in the appropriate context. So hence, the cows had an intricate plan of how to protect the majority of their herd. I'm not sure if the cows knew it, but I suspect Mother Nature did. Sometimes I think we get quite good at trying to maintain our individual efficiency at work. We put on strong faces in front of our clients and patients, and we try to help guide them as efficiently and cleverly as possible. We may even have niche members in clinics or offices that we pull out to face certain challenges so the rest of the herd can graze. And when necessary, we've learned to work as teams. We've learned to cooperate, and we get very familiar with forming a wall of protection. As workload increases, vulnerable population increases, manpower diminishes and resources dwindle, we have learned to shuffle back and forth along our wall of protection. Some of us are so good at shuffling that we're actually quite fast. We can really sprint. And some of us even know who we like to have flanking us, and we may even coordinate our side steps with them. But remember, this is not the same as the cow circle. The real niche of the cow circle was having optimal surveillance and knowing how to move and spin it correctly. So knowing who is behind you is of utmost importance, not just planning who should flank you. All the cows had to know how to shuffle appropriately, or the calves would become unprotected whenever a cow stepped forth with a coordinated plan. They also had to know which cow to use most efficiently so the others could preserve their steps. So knowing skill sets of every cow was imperative. In my story, the cows were successful in dissolving a potential threat before it even became a real threat. But that's because they knew how to intervene with select players at key moments. The coyote ran off, and hence life quickly returned to normal on our farm. I'd now like to tell another story. This story is different. My husband received a call that our cows were on the loose, and when we drove to the bottom of the dead-end road passing our property, sure enough, there they were, chaotically running around on a neighbor's property. They'd broken out of their pasture, traversed through about a mile of our fields, and eventually passed onto the road. They were worked up and mooing frequently, so painstakingly we ushered them back into our fields and gradually coaxed them home. It didn't take long to figure out that the cows had sporadically bolted from something, and they had actually charged through the electric fences. A neighbor from across the road quickly disclosed the problem to us. He had spotted a coyote that morning jogging through our farm, and my husband became suspicious of the events. These cows had not formed their circle, and they just simply ran for safety. A quick head count now depicted a problem. We were short one cow. The heifers were all there. It's terribly important to note that it was actually a calf that was missing, one of the vulnerable population. When healthcare is strained, it is often the patients that suffer. We searched for days for that calf. The cows continued to be stressed, and the farmer was equally distraught. Eventually, the body of the calf was found, mangled and eaten by the coyote. On closer examination, it looked like the calf had actually become entangled in barbed wire, and it hence became the coyote's prey after that. That calf had previously lived harmoniously, with barbed wire bordering the surrounding field for months. That is, until chaos ensued. It was the act of everyone bolting that ultimately failed the calf. Normally, on our farm, mother cows will bawl and moo for a couple of days when the calves are separated from them for weaning. But the mother cow of this dead calf was distressed for weeks. She mooed so much that the other cows started becoming distressed and started mooing back. And eventually, even cows at a neighboring farm started mooing back. The entire herd continued to be stressed out, and one can assume the neighbors weren't impressed with us either. It was a ripple effect. For the farmer, that translated into increased costs. He'd lost the income from the calf. He had wasted time and energy searching for the calf. He had a continued threat from more coyotes now that he had a carcass on his property. He was frustrating neighbors, and now he was losing productivity and hence money from the entire herd. So you can read between the lines and see the moral of this story. Some people may argue that current events that we see in our work environment are not really like coyotes. In fact, sometimes we don't actually know what the threat is going to be or if it's even going to be a threat. We just know that change is afoot. I will use a strange analogy. Perhaps instead of being farm animals grazing in a pasture and seeing a coyote passing by, we're farm animals sensing a different potential problem. Imagine this for a moment. Donkeys have alerted to smoke on the horizon. One cow has moved to another and the message is being dispersed. There are many factors to consider, and the cows need to worry about the calves as well. Is the fire going to ravage the farm? Will they lose shelter? Is the fire going to rush wild predators out of the woods towards the farm? Is a fire going to destroy grass or hay that the cows rely upon for food? So ultimately, all the cows have become invested in potential problems. And they're all eventually mooing, but the farmer doesn't initially respond. The cows eventually get organized enough that they start mooing in unison, and ultimately the farmer and most people in the neighborhood are now paying attention. We should remember that the farmer has a tough job. It isn't easy being in a leadership position. So this hypothetical farmer keeps trying to yell back to the cows that he can also see the smoke on the horizon, and yet he doesn't think he can do much about it. He's already notified 911, and the firefighters are trying to take care of it. The farmer does not perceive much more control over this. The cows continue to moo. The farmer yells back that he doesn't have a good solution. He only has a single horse trailer, and that's not capable of transporting the herd of cattle to a safer place. In other words, equipment issues can really plague all organizations. He explains that he does not have the money or resources to hire help or to purchase a cattle trailer. This farmer didn't even buy that old horse trailer. A previous farmer bought that. So changes in management can be an issue as well. And even though it may be the most practical thing on the farm, he can't afford to upgrade to something more useful. Financial constraints are always looming. So what should happen in that scenario? Well, if we think back to the initial cow story, perhaps a cow should form a circle. As already determined, it allows them some protection and support. We've also already determined it gives 360 degrees of vision to watch for potential threats. So if they have 360 degrees of vision, what else could they possibly see? Well, I like to assume that if they can watch for threats, they can also watch for help. We already know that the cows have developed some adaptive techniques to help with predators over the years, but perhaps they've never encountered fire before. They may need to think differently, and sometimes that involves liberating new ideas, and it involves asking for help of a different kind. On my farm, there's a little shed in the upper cow pasture, and it's surrounded by terrain that looks like the surface of the moon, enclosed by a wire fence. So let's assume that the cow's 360 degrees of vision allows them to spot that and see the pigs that are mucking about in the pig pen. Well, cows always just assumed that pigs were lazy and fat and probably didn't do much. But the cows have learned to think differently. What do pigs love to do? Remember, an individual's skill set is often something they love to do because it's easy for them. Well, I think that pigs like to dig. I'll allow for some creativity in my story, but if the cows are intuitive, they may convince those pigs to dig a wide trench. And ultimately, a trench may serve as a fire barrier, and it could buy them some valuable time. Eventually, it could even protect the herd from fire. Perhaps it's a silly analogy, but there may be some points that resonate within it. Now, I've thought good and hard about this, and I'm not so idealistic as to ignore the possibility that there may be times when even cows in circles could feel so stretched or feel that they have to spin so quickly that they no longer can keep the enlarging vulnerable population that they're trying to round up contained. In theory, they need to figure out how to make a larger cow circle. But I've noticed on big cattle ranches, it's not necessarily uncommon to lose a calf to a predator. And I'm strongly suspicious it's difficult for large numbers of cattle to form a circle, especially if they're spaced out. In that scenario, I suspect the cows wonder about trying to do something simple. Instead of having to meet and understand skills of many cows, perhaps they could just form multiple smaller circles. It would probably be less stressful and take less work. Each mother cow could simply gather up their own calf. Seems like a reasonable plan. But what happens to the orphan calves, the ones that don't have a mother in a predetermined circle clique? They may be some of the most vulnerable cows around, and they may be rambling in between the circles because the cows aren't really sure where those calves should belong. Okay, well, maybe the cows could form their small circles based on color. Brown in one circle, white in one circle, black in one circle. But what about the cows that are a blend or spotted? Maybe the cows could form their circles based on skills. The best kickers, protectors could form one circle, best milk producers or feeders could form another circle, and so on. What about calves that need food and protection? These circles of expertise may actually not be able to accommodate all of them. They would need protectors and feeders, and they'd have to move from circle to circle. And when they are transitioning in between or transitioning care, they would be even more vulnerable. Ultimately, the calves wouldn't really be able to stay protected, and none of the cows would be really sure where calves with multiple needs belong. Transitioning care is where some of the greatest lapses in patient safety can occur in the health system. Well, maybe the adult cows would be able to see little calves transitioning between circles that run into problems, and they could watch to see if the coyote's stalking them. In that scenario, maybe a bold Angus heifer could pop out of the circle to help. But remember, there is also a well-documented phenomenon noted in society called the bystander effect, in which individuals are less likely to offer help to a victim when others are present. The greater the number of bystanders, the less likely it is that one of them will help. Several factors contribute to that, including ambiguity, group cohesiveness, diffusion of responsibility that reinforces the mutual denial of a situation's severity. Sound familiar? Let's pretend, however, that the cows are educated and they realize the potential problems lone calves may encounter in a design like that. So the cows realize they want to do things in a way that saves the majority of their herd, not just always doing things that are quick and easy. The cows understand that they need to be clever. After all, they don't want to end up like the sheep on the farm. The cows know how effective a cow circle can be, so they start to imagine the amount of calves that a very large cow circle could protect if it was ever able to organize itself and function as efficiently as a small one. And even though it may take work, imagine what may be possible if they were able to understand, organize, and use skill sets of larger and larger quantities of cows. After my sleepless night picturing my cows, I decided to present these stories to the oncology staff where I work. And as a result of hearing about the cows, we decided to very quickly try to come up with a few words summarizing skill sets for every single person we work with, even those not routinely encountered. It started to make us think about all of the people important in protecting the vulnerable population. Pharmacy and lab techs, hospital volunteers, social workers, advocates, etc. We started to think of ways to tap into resources that may have been behind us rather than beside us. Some of the skills we noted may have seemed silly. For example, excellent baker may not have seemed relevant to providing the best patient care. However, when a nurse or doctor had been up all night with a sick child at home and drugged themselves to work without breakfast, the extra muffins brought in by that baker may have been the defining factor that improved patient care in that circumstance. And ultimately, we discovered that nothing was trivial, and we could find ways to optimize the unique skills of each person. We learned we could form a circle when needed, and we could get pretty slick at shuffling and spinning it too. I have been pondering, what might happen if we started to embark on small talk with colleagues in the elevator? What could occur if we took time for lunch with our colleagues? Recently, it's been suggested that there may have been benefits to the doctor's lounge after all. Does part of being efficient involve being selectively inefficient at times? Sometimes I'm left to wonder what might happen if we tried to learn one new thing about someone else at work every day, even if that was just their name. So the relocation of our clinic has still never occurred, and I was told that the logistics were simply too complex to accommodate everything we would have needed to provide satisfactory patient care after multiple employees provided input. So like the initial cows with the coyote, I suppose that a potential threat dissolved before it ever became a real threat. But we continue to be faced with ongoing adjustments and stressors every day at work. I hope we always remember how to adjust and spin our circle. I also hope we are creative and we can spot pigs when needed. So ultimately, these stories are not meant to represent any one specific event in our lives. The farm animals are not meant to represent certain individuals. I started by saying that we may be swayed to want to act like cows, but in truth, I suspect we all mimic roles of different characters in these stories at different points in time. I only relay the stories because I'm a storyteller. And just as narratives in medicine have proven to have a role in helping patients, I suspect narratives also help all of us. I believe there are lessons embedded in these stories, lessons about how to work effectively with one another, lessons about empathy, lessons about how to adapt, and lessons about how to think. I'm not going to pretend to know how to remedy strains at work. All I've done is observe some cows. However, I want you to remember, to acquire knowledge, one must study, but to acquire wisdom, one must observe. So thank you very much, guys. That's the end.
Thank you very much, Dr. Swan. Does anybody have any questions or any stories they'd like to share?
That's easy.
Thank you again. Just a reminder for those in attendance, if there's more than one of you at your site, if you could send me in an attendance sheet, and I'll send around evaluations this afternoon if you want your CE form. Okay, thanks, everyone. We'll see you in a couple weeks for Journal Club.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks very much.